Finding Hope, the Road to Recovery.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Finding Hope, the Road to Recovery. My name is Lorraine Ragosta from Tarzana Treatment Centers, and I'm joined by my colleague, Ms. Sonya Keith, mental health therapist.
Thank you, Lorraine. I'm very pleased to be here with you to discuss homelessness and mental health. As you know, I do mental health therapy with the population who is homeless, quite often out where they're living. So that means whether they're in shelters or they're living on the street or they're in tents or they're in residential therapy. And a big part of being able to establish permanent housing and being able to stay in that housing has to do with addressing their goals regarding mental health services.
Okay, so today we want to have a great discussion and give our audience some information just starting at the beginning. So let's talk a little bit about the homelessness and what we define as homelessness.
So the HUD definition of homelessness has to do with where somebody sleeps at night. Are they sleeping somewhere that's fit for human habitation? And if not, then they are homeless. So that means if somebody is sleeping in a restaurant kitchen floor, that's not a placement for human habitation. Clearly, the sidewalks, the streets, our city parks are not places that are meant for human habitation. But also, if I am what's called doubling up or being part of the hidden homeless, I would be homeless if I am staying at your house and I'm just crashing there till I can get a place of my own, or I'm saving up some money, or something has happened that I don't have a place of my own, I'm not paying rent, I'm not collecting mail, and I have no expectation I can stay there, then I'm also homeless. But what people also don't understand sometimes is that if I stay in a hotel for less than 28 days and I have no place of my own, I'm homeless. And for us, because we work at a treatment center, at Tarzana Treatment Centers, if somebody is homeless the day before they go into treatment, then when they leave treatment, they are still homeless. And the reason that that definition is so important is if we don't talk about it and we're not familiar with it, then we don't address it. Because in order to understand what we're going to fix, we have to be able to see the problem.
So you used a word for our audience. You used HUD. What does that mean, and why is that important?
HUD stands for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So housing, which should be a human right, is something that all Americans deserve to have, a place to stay and to sleep. But then there needs to be rules about that. What is housing and what is fair housing? So what HUD does is it establishes, a definition of what homelessness is, a definition of what housing is, an idea of what fair housing is. And that's why your landlord can't come to you on Monday and say your rent is $500, and on Wednesday say your rent is $800, and next Thursday say it's $4,000, because we all understand that that's not how rent works. Why does it work that way? Because we have systems like HUD.
Okay. And I think that's really important. And I think for our audience, I think the next important piece of that conversation is, in the current time frame, what are some of the statistics in Los Angeles County that's very important to Los Angeles County as a whole, but Tarzana Treatment Centers and the work that we're doing with, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but the work that we're doing with our individuals, our in-house neighbors.
Well, we talk about homelessness being an epidemic. And right now, I know we're so tired of the phrase epidemic and pandemic, but homelessness in Los Angeles is spiraling out of control. The homeless count in 2021 had 59,000 Los Angelinos being homeless. The homeless count for last year was 69,000 people were homeless in the city and county of Los Angeles. The current 2023 homeless count is going on right now at nighttime, where people are going and they're counting it. We need to know how many people are homeless so we know what to do with all this money that is being collected from our taxes and all the rules that are coming out. So how many people are homeless, but are they the 4 different types of homeless? Are they episodically homeless? Are they chronically homeless, meaning that they're going to be homeless more than 5 times in 10 years? Are they the hidden homeless? Or are they just transitioning as homeless? So something has happened and they're just about to get housing in a moment, or they're staying at a sober living home. So in order to find out which types of services we need to fund, we need to know how many people, because if we have 5 people in the county who are homeless, then we don't need $8 billion. But if we have 69,000 people who are homeless, then we need a lot more money, and we need to find out the variety of services that can be offered and funded to reduce that number.
I think that when, we're talking about homelessness and our unhoused neighbors, it's really important to start at the beginning, which is what are some of the reasons? And obviously, I know there's a lot of opinions and a lot of myths, and we're here to dispel some of that and really have this honest conversation. But what are some of the reasons that an individual might become homeless?
I'm so glad you asked. So I've been working in homeless services for almost 30 years, and I've given this some thought. And to me, there are 9 main causes that lead someone to be homeless, but also those are the same 9 causes that can trap somebody in homelessness. And that is, poor mental health, substance use disorder, and everyone thinks, oh, well, that's it. Those are the 2, but it's not. We hear all the time about natural disasters, floods, fires, things like that. If you've become criminally involved, you're more likely to become homeless because that shows up on your record. It makes it hard to find jobs, even though here in LA, we got rid of, we had a campaign for remove the box, so you no longer have to disclose if you were a criminal for some types of crimes, for some types of jobs. But also that makes it harder to find housing and to be able to pay for housing. Having been a victim of a crime can lead you to homelessness, whether that's a domestic violence and family crime, because that's another reason, or just anything that's going to impact your mental health, or somebody taking away your resources like your car, then you're not able to get to work. Not being able to get to work or having a job to go to. Job loss. We just learned that Google and all the tech giants just had massive job layoffs. Those people don't find jobs within the next 3 months, assuming they have that money saved up. They are at risk of becoming homeless. And then also physical illness or disability, suddenly becoming sick. As we have learned with this recent pandemic, that can cause a job loss. And also intellectual disability, and lack of education, because those are things that people need in order to create self-sustainability.
Okay. And I think that there were 2 in there in particular that we really want to talk about as it relates to providing services, behavioral health services. You hear the term behavioral health services, and what that typically entails, just for our audience members, is things like mental health services, substance use disorder, and you'll hear in the industry, and if you ever go into treatment centers or like Tarzana Treatment Centers, SUD. And I think it's important for us all to have that honest conversation in the language that's used. But let's talk a little bit about those services and how they connect to providing, to working with individuals that are experiencing homelessness.
Absolutely. Because when we talk about the causes and things that make people homeless, it's important to realize that it's not often that it's just one cause of things that happen. So sometimes you can have co-occurring disorders or co-occurring events in your life, like mental health and substance use disorder can happen. So when we have housing case managers who set down people's goals and say, if you were my client, hey, Lorraine, so you want to end your housing, you want to end your homelessness, not your housing. When you want to end your homelessness, what are some goals? What are some things that we can do? Quite often, the number one goal is I want to achieve sobriety or maintain my sobriety, and I want to work on my mental health. And that's really important because even if you haven't been diagnosed with a mental health disorder, homelessness itself is a crisis and can throw you into a worse mental health state.
I think that it's really important because you use the word crisis to then go to the next word that's a part of that is sometimes talked about, but not always talked about, but trauma in particular. And I think that creating kind of what a universal definition of trauma is so that our watchers and so that we're using the language so that you understand that as we continue to talk about trauma, how that really does impact every single service that's provided to our participants that are identifying as homeless and needing of behavioral health services.
Absolutely. I'm going to let you give the definition of trauma, but what I can tell you is what happens in somebody's body when they're going through a trauma. We always hear about the fight or flight or freeze or fawn effect, and what that does to your endocrine system, because you have these cool little organs in your body, like one's on your thyroid, 2 are sitting on top of your kidneys, and they shoot out this cortisol level that tells you, hey, alert, alert, there's danger. You need to do something about this right now. And ideally, that should only happen for a short period of time, and then your body relaxes, it absorbs the cortisol, and danger has passed. But when you're homeless, you have no place to go where you are safe, secure, no four walls, a roof, and a door that locks, where you feel safe. And for me, what I've noticed with my clients is that is the epicenter of why the trauma lasts so long. So how would you define trauma?
So for everyone listening and watching, trauma is when someone experiences either a real or perceived threat to their person. And that could mean anything from, the more obvious ones, which is someone has threatened you with a gun, someone has injured you, someone fights with you, they're attempting to, steal your possessions, you were in a domestic violence situation. But there's also the ones where you're watching it occur to other individuals, where you are seeing someone else's life threatened. And that's a really important understanding, where in our communities of individuals that are experiencing homelessness, that not only is homelessness a trauma in and of itself, but everything that's entailed, the communities that they're in, which is, the encampments, the homeless shelters. But we haven't even talked about where their trauma is that led them to. So all those 9 reasons that we talked about are all traumas in and of themselves. Losing a job, domestic violence, a medical trauma, a natural disaster. Of course, we live in Los Angeles County. We have things like fires that occur regularly, flooding that's occurred recently within the last couple months. We had earthquakes, knock on wood, we're not going to have another one. But I think this is an important, mudslides, anything else that's kind of happening among everything else historically. So why is trauma important to talk about, and how does that actually, impact the work that we're doing with the individuals that are experiencing homelessness, in particular, centered around the services that Tarzana Treatment Centers does provide?
So what we provide at Tarzana Treatment Centers is called trauma-informed care. And this is really important that every member of our staff is trained on it, because sometimes you work with a client and, for instance, I'll go knock on a shelter door and they won't answer the door. Or they'll answer the door and they'll be hyper aggressive. What do you want? And they'll try to make themselves as big as possible and, try to be imposing. And as a worker, if I'm not aware that they've experienced a trauma, then I might take that personally and I might be angry. If we have somebody staying in a shelter house and we find out that they've been sleeping with a knife under their bed, I might take it personally that you're violating the rules and you're just not respecting me, and I've made sure you have this shelter bed. But if I were to have a trauma-informed perception, I might think, here's a person who has been on their own in the world, homeless, without power, at the whim of other people, in a place where people tend to be violent towards somebody who is vulnerable. And it's a little scary for them. What is this knife doing for them? It's creating a sense of safety. So while I will have to explain that we can't have weapons here, we can't have knives, and we've explained the rules, and it's because we want everyone to be safe, I can also take a moment to recognize that in this place right now, maybe you're not feeling safe. How can I make you feel safer? How can I reassure that you're in an okay place? And that's the importance of trauma-informed care, is I'm going to build a relationship. My client is going to know that I respect them. I'm going to listen to where they're coming from. I'm going to take it to heart and then design my interactions with this person to respect what's going on with them. Otherwise, we build up service resistance, and then I'll say, you've broken the rules. I don't want to see you anymore. You're no longer welcome on the grounds. And if our agency goal is to assist people, and I'm just turning people away because they're difficult to work with, then we failed. And so that's why at Tarzana Treatment Centers, we take trauma-informed care to be such a serious core of the types of services and the method of services we deliver.
So, we just spent some time talking about the reasons of homelessness and why it's important to understand those, the foundation of them. We talked a little bit about the types of homelessness that are occurring, which is an important idea because that does impact different types of programs and services. And then we really spent some time talking about behavioral health services so that we're all talking the same language. When we talk about behavioral health services, let's just start at what is mental health services? Like, what do those look like?
Okay, so first of all, let's define what mental health need is. So A mental health need is when somebody is unable to live their life and enjoy their life the way that they normally can because something is going on with their mental health. And how do you decide if something is a mental health issue? First, you look to see, is it something that can be explained away by your physical health? No. Is it something that can be explained by your substance use, because there is substance use, voices, hallucinations, and things like that. And anything that's left over is a mental health issue. So it doesn't matter what your diagnosis is. It matters that you've identified that something is going on with you that's impairing your ability to be happy or to be successful or to live your life. And so then you reach out and you're asking for assistance and services. And with that, we have mental health treatment. Mental health treatment can happen in talk therapy one-on-one. It can happen in group sessions, which actually have been shown to be as effective as one-on-one therapy. And then there's also the possibility of one-on-one therapy with the addition of psychiatric services and medication. What works best for you is what works best for you. What works best for your best friend may not work best for you, because every individual is different. Every individual treatment is subjective, and it's an agreement between you, the patient, and your therapist.
Okay, so I think that really helps us understand mental health services, and we're going to, a little bit farther down the road, talk about how, Tarzana Treatment Centers and our own experience working with individuals does that, and what kind of entry point there is. And we're going to get into, shortly after a break, talk a little bit about substance use disorder treatment and how we're providing those services for individuals experiencing homelessness. And we're also going to talk about all the types of entry points, and then the resources that are existing for housing, and just some of the challenges that come with working with individuals who are experiencing homelessness. We're going to take a really quick break, and we'll be right back.
This is a message for United Nations and for all the nations globally. Help Iranian people. Women, children, men are suffering on the streets of Iran. Help Iranian people. 4 decades of atrocities. They need your help.
How long are you going to remain silent? Wake up. Stop supporting Iranian government. Our people need you.
Women around the world stand in solidarity with the women of Iran. We are with you. We will be your voice.
The Persian Empire gifted human rights to the world, to the United Nations. Today, we look forward to your support to use the concept that brought unity to the whole world, to bring it back to my people, to my country. We appreciate all the love and support we get from everyone.
To all the non-Iranian artists who have supported Iran during this time, we thank you. We need your support. The Iran issue is a human rights issue.
Please stand by Iranian people. Women, life, liberty.
Finding Hope, the Road to Recovery. Today, as we see the COVID-19 pandemic start to ease and the world open back up, the opioid epidemic remains out of control. Sadly, drug overdoses now exceed vehicular accidents as the #1 cause of unintended death in the United States. More than ever, now is the time when we must renew our efforts to find solutions for those afflicted. The answer lies in a vast array of treatment options that are backed by evidence-based practices contained within an integrated healthcare model. In this series, clinicians and experts from Tarzana Treatment Centers, a Southern California nonprofit celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, will illuminate the road to recovery through interviews and presentations. Our simple message is this: that hope exists for you or someone you care about. Please join us to find out more.
A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. We cannot change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge. The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. Man needs difficulties. They are necessary for health. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. Dreams are the guiding words of the soul. Why should I henceforth not love my dreams, and not make their riddling images into objects of my daily consideration? The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Show me a sane man, and I will cure him for you. The debt we owe to the play of imagination is incalculable. The most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a sense of security and calm that is not easily disturbed. It is just these intense conflicts and their conflagration which are needed to produce valuable and lasting results. Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. Every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol, morphine, or idealism. Shrinking away from death is something unhealthy and abnormal, which robs the second half of life of its purpose. Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking. The one is the shadow of the other. Understanding does not cure evil, but it is a definite help, inasmuch as one can cope with a comprehensible darkness. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness, and the word happy would lose its meaning if it were not balanced by sadness. Knowledge rests not upon truth alone, but upon error also.
Well, for the first month or so, we were just numb. Couldn't believe it happened. I couldn't sleep. Every moment of that 30 minutes just played over and over in my mind. I would fall asleep thinking about it. I'd dream about it. I'd wake up thinking about it. And slowly my sadness started to turn to anger. A 27-year-old young man with a normal, healthy heart and lungs should not die of cardiopulmonary arrest in a trauma center, intensive care unit. That shouldn't have happened. You know, by society's standards, he was very ordinary. You know, he never went to college. He wasn't famous. He wasn't a standout. He wasn't, you know, any different than, you know.
Welcome back to Finding Hope, the Road to Recovery. We're talking about homelessness and behavioral health services. I'm Lorraine Ragosta from Tarzana Treatment Centers. Before the break, we were talking about mental health services, and so we're actually going to now talk a little bit about substance use and substance use disorder services that exist, especially in particular with our homeless individuals. So let's talk a little bit about substance use disorder treatment and what that looks like.
So, as you know, Tarzana Treatment Centers started in 1972, just the same year I was founded also, in the city of Tarzana, California. And in addition to substance use disorder treatment, they also do mental health services and primary care services, because it's not that one issue happens in a vacuum. We do integrated services so that everybody can talk to each other and we can treat the entire person. Substance use disorders happen to a person, but when it happens to a person, it also tends to happen to their family and to their community. It does not happen just in a vacuum. So treating the disorder is not just treating the substance, not saying stop taking the substance. It's also what's causing you to take the substance, what's going on, how do you feel before, what's happening in the here and now, what's happening after you take the substance, and how is it affecting your life. So there's a lot of motivational interviewing going on when we do that treatment, which is really listening to your client. You can't decide that you know what's going on in somebody else's mind and what's causing them to do that. So when we talk about substance use disorder treatment, we're really helping the person to change their brain chemistry, change their brain patterns, and to establish healthier patterns, but also to really understand their disease, because substance use disorder is a disease. There's a lot of psychoeducation involved, and people really become experts on the symptoms of addiction and what happens to break that type of addiction and patterns. Substance use disorder is so frustrating, though, both on the part of the person who's suffering from the disorder and from people who are associated with that person, including their treatment team and their family members, because sometimes it looks like everything's going great and your person has achieved sobriety. And we want to use words like sobriety and not use words like being clean. Oh, now they're clean, or their test came back dirty, because that has connotations. And you wouldn't look at somebody who has the flu and go, you're gross, oh, you're dirty with flu germs. You would say, you're experiencing the flu. You're experiencing your substance use disorder. It's showing up in the test that we're giving you, whether it's a urine test or a blood test. It's showing up in your behavior patterns. What can we do to address that and to bring you back to a place of sobriety? So people will become sober, they'll maintain their sobriety, and sometimes they'll think, I've been sober long enough that I don't need to keep going to treatment. So after somebody achieves sobriety, we can continue treating them for a year with the way that health insurance is billed. And then we have recovery support services that can happen at any time. And then after that, the person is no longer receiving health insurance provided treatment. And so they might be receiving outside services such as NA, AA, or other types of community-based organizations.
So for our watchers, NA is Narcotics Anonymous and AA is Alcoholics Anonymous. And for family members, it's Al-Anon, which is one that's meant specifically for family members that have individuals who are alcoholics.
And Alateen, if your parents are alcoholics and you're living in that home environment. So when you go for substance use disorder treatment, sometimes people want to know, well, what kinds of substances can I have treatment for? Treatment happens in a variety of different ways. So just like when we have mental health services that can be done individually or in groups, which can also be done inpatient in a hospital, we have substance use disorder treatments that can happen in a detox, which is anywhere from 3 to 10 days while you're working to get the substances out of your bloodstream, so that then you come from a place of sobriety and you can start working your treatment plan. There's also residential treatment where you don't need to go through detox, or perhaps you've already detoxed, which happens a lot. We're finding in the hospitals, then people are presenting themselves for treatment, and that can last, 30, 60, 90 days, depending on what it is you need, what the curriculum is of the treatment center that you're going to, and how fast you progress through it. And then there's outpatient services where you're not living in a treatment center, and outpatient services can happen for people who are living in homes, living in apartments, living in shelters, living in tents. And typically what happens with outpatient services is that you will come into the clinic and meet with your clinician and do one-on-one services. You might be doing group services also, or alone. And then during the most active part of COVID, when we were learning how to treat people while we were living in a pandemic, what was happening is we were providing telehealth services where we would meet with people through HIPAA, Health Information Privacy and Protection Act, HIPAA qualified Zoom meetings, or we were talking to people through the telephone just to make constant contact with them, to support them, because substance use disorder treatment is not like coming in and getting your flu shot. It's not a one and done service. It happens over a period of time, because the issues that brought you to using the substances in the first time don't go away just because you went in for services.
So let's talk about those types of services as it relates to our individuals who are experiencing homelessness, in particular, the entry points of services. So how does someone touch behavioral health services, or, in this case, Tarzana Treatment Center services that are provided, that if they're experiencing homelessness?
So if you are homeless and you want to connect with services, you have some options. You can always call the county information line, which is 211, and say, I'm interested in services. That is a free service. You can do it even from a payphone. It answers 24 hours a day. You can also call what's called the SASH line, and they will connect you to different types of services. You can call your treatment center directly and ask for admissions, and they will screen you for services over the phone. You can talk to your primary care physician about this. These are things that are going on. And typically at your annual physical, your primary care physician will ask you if you're using substances, whether they're prescribed or not. And that's important to notice that drug use is not only, oh, well, you were getting some meth on the corner. A substance use disorder can happen because you were issued opiates and then your body became dependent on it. It's a health issue. It's not a character issue. You can also receive services by just talking to a friend and saying, hey, I need access to services. And we often will find people are presenting themselves to the emergency room or coming in with the paramedics because their substance ingestion has caused physical problems.
And I think that really relates to what we were talking about earlier about homelessness and the reasons why someone would fall into homelessness. I think that it's important to talk about, where we're trying to intervene with individuals who are experiencing homelessness even before they actually end up or at risk of homelessness. And so I think the entry points into services are really, I appreciate you kind of explaining that, because I think that sometimes people think, well, I have to be at that point to hit those, to be, I have to be homeless before I have to get there. A lot of times with Tarzana Treatment Centers and the services, and a lot of treatment centers in particular, we want to help you before you get to those points where you feel so desperate. And I think, let's talk a little bit about, some of what we found to be the most effective ways of interacting with individuals who have experienced homelessness, which is, let's talk about field-based services a little bit, because it reduces barriers to accessing services.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because field-based services is what I spend 75% of my time doing. And what that means is that I'm going out into the world and meeting people where they're staying. Because if you are having problems with homelessness, you're also more than likely having a financial crisis. So you may not have a car or insurance or gas or a bus pass or access to a taxi to make it to come see me. So if I can meet you where you're staying or in a park near where you're staying, then you're more likely to come see me. Also, the benefit of having services out in the world is that if you need services, but you're not sure what it is, it takes away a lot of the fear. So I will talk to people quite often at shelters who will talk to me for 2 or 3 times before they figure out that I'm a mental health therapist. They're like, oh, I just thought you were that really nice lady who comes from Tarzana Treatment Centers, and everybody always wants to sign up and line up and hang out with you and talk to you. And I'm like, yes, I'm a therapist. And they're like, have you been doing ninja therapy on me? And I'm like, no, I promise I haven't. I'm sneaky therapy. I'm just building rapport. But at the same time, I have a partner who comes with me to these locations or will come separately from me and talk to people specifically about what a substance use disorder treatment can be. And the great thing is then when people see their neighbors talking to a therapist, their cubicle neighbors, their homeless neighbors talking to somebody, talking to a substance use counselor, then they're like, okay, nothing terrible has happened to this person. Maybe I want to go talk to that counselor as well. And now I know what it is. And then if somebody needs to be directly put into a detox center or residential treatment, we have somebody already there, already in your shelter building who can do that. And your administration at the shelter doesn't have to figure out how to call or how to make this happen, because we already have an access portal built in there. And that's one of the things I really like about Tarzana Treatment Centers, is that we really believe in being a good community member, being a good neighbor, and building partnerships with our shelter agencies as well as with our local hospitals. So all these places where people tend to go to say, hey, I'm having problems of this specific nature, then that agency can say, okay, well, we already have somebody that we know. We've got an inside man. We're going to connect you. I
think that's great, because I think that really talks about, and this is, what are promising practices for working with individuals who are either at risk of homelessness or are experiencing homelessness, where it comes from an integrated approach, as we kind of talked about, Tarzana Treatment Centers has done that integrated approach and found a lot of success, where it comes from a trauma-informed perspective, where we take into consideration someone's mental health needs, their substance use needs, so their behavioral health services needs, addressing those concerns. But I think everyone wants to talk about okay, well, what about the housing? So let's talk about a little bit about the types of resources that exist, like the housing options that do exist for individuals who are experiencing housing. And then I think the next piece to that what exists, what are the challenges? Because we can't have a conversation about this and talk about behavioral health services and homelessness and individuals experiencing homelessness without talking about what are the challenges. So what are some of the resources that exist in terms of housing?
So when somebody has already landed in themselves in a position where they're homeless and they want to find housing, what level of housing are you talking about? Are you talking about an emergency bed where they're just coming in because they have nowhere to go and it's cold and it's raining, and so maybe a winter shelter bed or a cot somewhere on a church floor? Are you talking about transitional housing, which is a house where maybe there's 4 people in a bedroom and there's a curricula, or there's sober living where there's drug testing involved in staying in this house? Are you talking about somebody just saying, hey, I need housing, but I don't have the money for this? And so then there are subsidies. And again, housing and urban development, Section 8, there are governmental programs as well as local county programs and sometimes organizational funds that can help pay for part of somebody's rent, whether it's lifelong or a few months. And not every housing situation is fit for everybody. And the most important thing about different types of housing services is that there simply are not enough. And if there are enough, because it's not like we don't have enough housing for every homeless individual. So in Los Angeles County, we actually have an empty house or an empty apartment for every single man, woman, and child, they, them, he's, she's, and we's, who might be experiencing homelessness. It's just that we don't have access to put somebody in there. The cost is prohibitive. Being able to find it is prohibitive. These transitional housings and homeless shelters that are houses and not industrial looking are hard to get. When I went to look for houses for a homeless program that Tarzana Treatments has, the biggest issue I had was being really transparent to the landlords and saying, I want to use your house where people who are experiencing substance use disorder treatment and mental health treatment can stay while they're going through this treatment. If I had said, I want to use your house while somebody's healing from a broken leg, people are much more inclined to say yes. But the stigma that comes from behavioral health services is really prohibitive when we try to go and find housing. And then that landlord has to figure out, well, now my tenant is an agency and not an individual person. What does this do? How do I do insurance? Working out all that logistics. So a lot of the services are things that don't exist yet. Training for homeowners on how to be landlords to people who have high risk needs, as well as tolerance, and then teaching the neighbors who are NIMBYs, which stands for not in my backyard. There are people who think, absolutely, people should be living in houses. Absolutely, people should have a safe place to stay and live while they're working on other issues. But I would really like them to not affect my property value, so maybe not where I have to see them. But then there's nowhere for people to go.
So I think that's a really great segue into the idea of talking about challenges for providing services to individuals experiencing homelessness. So, obviously there's a lot of opinions behind this, and a lot of people have lots of feelings, and we're not here to kind of say what's right and what's wrong, but what have you experienced in the services that you've been providing that have been challenges for working with individuals experiencing homelessness or unhoused neighbors?
My first biggest challenge that my partner in providing outdoor field-based services and I experience is that people who are homeless are by nature transitory. So we will meet with somebody, we will make a good connection, and either they've found housing or they've been evicted from their shelter, or they've gotten into a skirmish with somebody who lives in the area so they can no longer be there. So then we have a hard time finding them. One of the greatest things that has ever happened in my life is the low-income phones, which you will commonly hear referred to as the Obama phones because it came out during the Obama administration, which are cell phones with data plans that if you have below a certain income level, you might qualify for it. If you have a food stamp, which we call an EBT or a CalFresh card, then you will qualify for this free phone. Those phones are great because then we can call people, but those phones notoriously break, or people will get a new phone with a new number and they don't have a place to port all of their contact information. Because when I was a kid, we had one phone, it was on the kitchen wall, and we had a phone book right next to it. Now that we all have cell phones, I don't know anybody's number, but if I were to lose this, I would lose my connection to everybody that provides services to me. And that same thing happens to my unhoused clients. So that is my biggest challenge, is being able to maintain that relationship and find them. Another challenge is just stigma of they already feel othered. I just othered them, my own self. People who are experiencing housing crisis or a lack of housing feel othered. They already know that something is going on with them, with their mental health or substance use or any of those 9 causes. And now they're going to come in for treatment and they feel really bad about it.
Yeah, and I think we could spend a lot of time talking about the multiple challenges that exist, including stigma. And those are just 2. And we've really appreciated the time that we had to talk to you and share this great information, a little bit about, homelessness, the reasons for homelessness, the services that we have found successful, in particular at Tarzana Treatment Centers, and just some of the models that we find are important when working with individuals who are experiencing homelessness. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate the time. Thank you, Miss Keith, for joining us and sharing your experience and some of your perspectives.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. And right after this, you'll see information if you're seeking support of any kind and need, mental health, substance use, or even primary care services. We're here to support you and the community.
Brought to you by Tarzana Treatment Centers. You can visit our website at www.tarzanatc.org or call 1-800-996-1051.